In the second session of the poem The Solitary Reaper, let us look at the themes of the poem. Theme of art and communication. The Solitary Reaper is a poem about music, the song a Scottish girl sings as she cuts hay with a sickle. Though the poem's narrator cannot understand what the girl is actually singing about, the girl's song sticks with him, its melancholy beauty echoing in his head long after its sound has faded. In this way, the poem suggests the ability of art to transcend cultural boundaries and even language itself. Art in the poem can communicate feeling or emotion, even in the absence of concrete understanding. And yet, at the same time, the poem also communicates a bit of uncertainty about whether poetry itself can offer this connection in the way that music can. The speaker focuses on the transfixing power of the reaper's mysterious song. He describes her song in elegant and slightly hyperbolic terms. It fills the valley with sound, and she sings as if her song could have no ending. He also invites readers to share in his wonder and pleasure, asking them to stop here and listen. Yet he cannot actually understand the reaper's song and even cries out, "Will no one tell me what she sings?" He is either too far away to make out the words, or more likely, the reaper is singing in Scots, the national language of Scotland, which is closely related to but different from English. He wonders whether she is singing about some ancient epic battles or simply the humble and familiar sorrows of everyday life. In either case, the speaker draws pleasure from the girl's song despite not knowing its specifics. For the speaker, the power of the reaper's song transcends cultural and linguistic divisions, allowing the speaker to feel connected to this solitary highland lass. Since poets often refer to their own art as song, the reader may also take the speaker's reflection on the power of the reaper's song as a reflection on the power of poetry itself. In the poem's focus on music, the speaker suggests that poetry's power lies less in its content and more in its rhythm, its music. The sheer pleasure of musical language is a means of connection. Of course, this suggestion puts pressure on the musical qualities of the poem to deliver on this claim. Because the speaker makes this suggestion, the reader may therefore want to pay particular attention to the poem's form, that is, the way that it organizes language and tries to find music in it. Careful attention paid to the poem's form reveals something interesting. The poem is actually full of musical conflict. The first four lines of each stanza are roughly a ballad, a low popular form, and likely the form of the reaper's song. The next four lines approximate heroic couplets, a more prestigious form in the 18th century. In this way, the poem alternates between high and low forms. It seems almost at war with itself, unable to establish a solid, steady musical structure. This shifting of forms suggests that beneath its celebration of the reaper's song's capacity to transcend cultural boundaries, the poet remains in some way insecure about the capacities of poetry to do the same. The song simply creates the connection. The poem, to a degree, must work to do so. Thus, even as the speaker appreciates the transcendent beauty of the reaper's song and of art to transcend all boundaries to offer connection. He struggles to capture such beauty on the page. Theme of the limits of poetry. Despite the power of the Reaper's song, which creates a connection across linguistic and cultural boundaries, the speaker spends much of the poem trying and failing to find the language to describe her song. The poem thus stresses the distinction between the speaker and the girl, and between poetry and song. Her song and her life remains beyond what his poem can represent. Indeed, it is possible to read the poem as being about the failure of poetry, and specifically of certain poetic language to adequately describe this pure, unpretentious music. In this way, the poem implicitly calls for a new kind of poetry that could better capture the reaper's song. The poem begins in the present tense. The speaker asks the reader to behold yon solitary Highland lass. It seems at first almost as though the speaker is out on a hike, meaning he's climbing a hill, with someone and is trying to get their attention. Listen, the speaker commands at the end of the first stanza. However, the fourth stanza shifts into the past tense. The maiden sang as if her song could have no ending. The speaker is not in the valley watching the girl. Rather, he is recalling a particularly beautiful memory. Her music, as he reveals in the poem's final lines, has haunted him, staying in his heart long after he actually heard it. He is trying to describe the song to someone who wasn't there and who did not hear the lass's song with him. There is thus a struggle at the core of the poem, as the speaker must find a way to represent her music in language. He tries to do this formally. The first four lines of every stanza is in a modified form of the ballad, a form associated with popular songs in English and Scots. The lass is likely singing in this format herself, meaning the form of the poem suggests a kind of affinity between the speaker's own art and the lass's music. However, the second group of four lines in each stanza switches into rhymed iambic tetrameter couplets, a high elevated form distant from the low popular ballad. Put another way, as the poem struggles to capture the girl's music in writing, it finds itself unable to do so by mirroring the formal simplicity of that music. Further, the content of his poem suggests another difficulty inherent in trying to capture music in writing. In the poem's second stanza, for instance, the speaker tries out a number of traditional metaphors for song. He compares the lass to a nightingale and cuckoo bird. He employs the high diction traditional to poetic descriptions of strange foreign beauty, invoking Arabian sands and the farthest Hebrides. But in each case, he admits that the beauty of the lass's song, lass, as you may understand, means young girl, exceeds these traditionally beautiful things. Her song transcends not only language, then, but also the resources of poetry, at least the traditional resources of poetic cliche. And in the third stanza, the speaker admits that he doesn't even know what the song is about. It could be about great battles, or it might be about heartbreak. In two key regards, then, his poetry fails to meaningfully recreate the song he heard. He can't describe its beauty and he can't summarize its content. In a way, the poem is a document of its own failure. However, since the speaker has opened the possibility that he might be able to create a kind of sympathy between his art and the lass's song, the poet might also be understood as a call or a manifesto. It subtly implies the need for a new kind of poetry, a new kind of poetic language better suited to the task of representing that beauty of the reaper's song than the traditional, cliched language at its disposal. The theme of nature and the poet. Wordsworth was one of the leading figures of English Romanticism, an artistic and intellectual movement that swept across Europe at the end of the 18th century. In contrast to the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on scientific reason, Romanticism drew on feelings often provoked by the solitary contemplation of nature. Wordsworth, for instance, described poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. In other words, poetry is a calm recollection of intense emotion. The Solitary Reaper is a clear example of Wordsworthian romanticism, since its speaker reflects on a powerful experience of nature from a tranquil distance. Though he does not know what she is singing about, the speaker seems to ascribe to the reaper a sort of virtuousness and purity on the basis of her simpler existence and relative proximity to nature. The poem seems to subtly suggest the nobility and honesty of physical labor, like that which this girl performs. In doing so, however, the poem reduces the reaper's participation in human history and politics. The poem presents two sets of actions. On the one hand, the reaper cuts and binds the grain and sings a melancholy strain. On the other hand, the speaker and the reader behold and listen. There is thus an implicit distinction between the reaper and the speaker in terms of their relationships with nature. While the reaper works directly on it, the speaker observes it and her from a distance. She is a participant while he is a spectator. The reaper is implied to a natural existence. Sorry. The reaper is implied to be closer to a natural existence than the speaker. In terms of romantic thought, she is also therefore implied to be closer to the source of poetry itself, since poetry comes from nature. In On Naive and Sentimental Poetry, the romantic poet and critic Friedrich Schiller argues that the poets of his time have lost their intimacy with nature. They observe it from a distance and long to recover their proximity, meaning closeness to it, whereas early poets participated in it directly. The reaper seems almost a model of this direct participation. As the speaker admires the reaper's proximity to nature, however, he reduces her participation in human history and politics. He treats the reaper as something to observe, to draw inspiration from, and something ultimately separate from his world and its concerns. The poem was written at a time of political economic upheaval, just after the French Revolution and in the midst of the Industrial Revolution and the rise of Napoleon. But in the poem, the reaper works with pre industrial tools in a landscape unmarred by factories mines, or railroads. Indeed, in stanza 3, as the speaker tries to imagine what the reaper might be singing about, he allows that she might be interested in politics, but only the politics of the past, battles and catastrophes that happened long ago. The reaper is thus sequestered from the present, means separated, from its political and economic struggles. In contemplating her song, the speaker transforms her into something like nature itself, beyond or outside of human history, apt for contemplation. The solitary reaper, symbols of the poem. The symbol of nightingale. The nightingale is a small migratory bird native to England. Its winters in sub-Saharan Africa, not Arabia, as the speaker suggests. It is known for its loud and beautiful song, which it often sings at night. It is often invoked by poets. Indeed, it often serves as a symbol for poets themselves. Perhaps flattering themselves, they compare their own song to a beautiful bird's warbling. Warbling means singing. More broadly, the bird is associated with creativity and inspiration, with mourning and passionate speech. This tradition stretches to classical poetry. The Latin poet Virgil compares Orpheus's mourning after he loses Eurydice. Orpheus is a Greek mythological character, and Eurydice was his wife, to the lament of the nightingale. In Renaissance English poetry too, the nightingale is frequently invoked. Romantic poets like Wordsworth drew upon and expanded this tradition. For them, the nightingale was not simply a symbol for the poet, the bird also served as a symbol for a creativity that exceeds and challenges human power, something just out of reach to which a poet might aspire. The bird's invocation in stanza 2 of The Solitary Reaper is thus complex and historically rich. It is, on the one hand, a high compliment. The speaker suggests that the reaper's song is more beautiful than the song of a bird whose song was probably beautiful. On the one hand, the speaker's compliment engages with the history of poetry, a long tradition of poets who compare themselves to the nightingale to valorize their art. That tradition falls short in this case. It does not adequately describe the reaper's song. Through the reaper's specific use of this symbol, then, the poem subtly suggests that the tradition itself needs to be re-evaluated and revised. The symbol of the cuckoo bird. The cuckoo is a family of birds which includes several common European songbirds. Like the nightingale, they are known for the beauty of their singing. Unlike the nightingale, they do not migrate, so they are present from the very earliest weeks of the spring season, that is. And fittingly, they are solitary birds, like the reaper herself. While the above characteristics are probably the primary reasons the speaker uses the bird to describe the solitary reaper, the cuckoo is also widely invoked in European mythology and literature. For example, in Greek mythology, Zeus transforms himself into a cuckoo to seduce Hera prior to their marriage. As with his use of the nightingale, then, the speaker offers an elegant and complicated compliment to the reaper when he compares her to a cuckoo bird. On the one hand, the reaper her song is like a beautiful bird's song. On the other hand, her song is measured against a tradition of European literature. And yet, as with the nightingale, the speaker asserts that the cuckoo's song is in fact less beautiful than the reaper's. In other words, the speaker finds this entire poetic tradition and this specific comparison insufficient to the beauty of her song. That the girl's song is too beautiful to be captured by this traditional symbol suggests that new traditions, new forms of comparison are thus necessary to adequately describe her song. The symbol of Arabia and Hebrides. Arabia is a historical region in the Mid East comprising present day Saudi Arabia and surrounding regions. Romantic poets and painters often invoke it in their work, using it as a symbol for distant and exotic lands. Further, they often eroticize the Middle East, emphasizing the sensual pleasures of life there. Wordsworth, though, takes a slightly different tack, emphasizing instead the climate, its desert terrain, and the difficulty of traveling across it, as many traders and merchants did during the period. Nonetheless, it remains an exotic and distant locale for an English readership of the 19th century. Arabia, though, is almost the opposite of the Hebrides, which are mentioned in line 16. Where Arabia is a hot, arid climate, the Hebrides, a chain of islands north of Scotland, are maritime and cold, meaning they are surrounded by the sea. Where Arabia is distant and exotic, the Hebrides are much closer at home. Between the two locales, then, the speaker spans the whole world, suggesting that nowhere in the world can one find a more beautiful singer than the reaper, and further that there is no traditional poetic metaphor that is up to the task of capturing the full beauty of the song. We will continue in the next session. Thank you.